Hello, my name is Dante Renee, and welcome to the 10 Room Bizarro YouTube page where I talk about films that I believe need to be talked about more. Like tonight's film, 1978's FABODJANTAN. FABODJANTAN. I am probably not pronouncing this correctly, and I'm very sorry. I'm blacking out, or with my finger, the breasts in this photo. But FABODJANTAN, and that's Swedish, has something to do with herding, I believe, in the translation. But this is directed by Mr. Joseph Sarno, and he used a pseudonym for this particular film. And this is the back of the release right here. And you can see a woman blowing a horn of sorts. Okay, alrighty. And this is actually put out by Studio Centertainment. And this is a foreign company. I actually was able to purchase this off diabolicdvd.com. It's a 2-disc set, and there are English subtitles with a lot of features, including a documentary on Joe Sarno and some other films as well, which I can't translate. But this is the main feature of the film, FABODJANTAN, 1978 release date. And let's get into this film right here, folks. This is a very, very interesting film that takes place on midsummer. And you are seeing a beautiful, lush Swedish farmland, Swedish countryside, with only a few characters in the storyline, only a few people. And it's within this, just a few characters and a very simple storyline that the complexities ring out in this adult X-rated film, which it is, because there is explicit graphic sexuality in this film and real sex in this film. This is one of Joe Sarno's hardcore films, but I would say this is a very, very unique film of that sexual basis, because we are in the country, we are in the farms, we are in the beautiful greenery of the midsummer, and we are meeting old historical, mythological stories and innermost sexual fantasies meeting Christian conservatism and faith and prayer and forgiveness, meeting those fantasies, and the litmus test of Christian faith, temptation versus other historical stories as well, biblical stories versus other historical stories, and involving a horn that when blown connects to the women of the land to birth sexual fervor, fire, knowing no bounds. Let's get into this film right here. 1978's FABODJANTAN. I know I do not speak Swedish well, but this is it right here, folks. Let's get into it. First and foremost, the music and the sound design for the film. There's very little music in this film whatsoever. The only music that you hear is a little bit of accordion-based music, which I believe is a kind of a big song, possibly in Sweden or historically based. You hear at the beginning of the film, the end of the film, and maybe midway into the film, just a little bit. The rest of the film is in silence. The silence of the moans and the dialogue and the conversations. This is almost a 2-hour-long film, by the way, as well, which is very unique also as a hardcore entry. But when you just have the natural sounds of the birds chirping and sounds in the distance, and in the woods and the forest and the water, you have the sounds of the horn being blown. It's the sounds of the horn. That's what you have. And that is the focal point of this film, and that horn is what you are hearing in a very similar repetitious tune played on the horn throughout the film. There is one gentleman in this film who, when upon having an orgasm, sounds like he is going into that he is being violently killed. I've never heard anything quite like it before. Joseph Sarno is known for really focusing on female orgasms, but within this film, I would say there's a bit of a focus on male orgasms with this particular character, with this particular actor in this film. Now, in terms of the cinematography and the style, I mean, we really have just taking in the lush. I mean, it really just feels like summer. It feels like you're in the woods. It feels like you're in a forest. It feels like you're in the countryside, farm. It felt a bit to me at times like a period piece, but I don't really believe it is. It's just the lush Swedish countryside. And there's a bit of magical forest to the movie, a little bit of magical countryside in the dialogue and in the mythology and the history. Now, this is a film that has very explicit sexuality. There's a lot of sex scenes in the film that are the story, that are part of the story. And there's also a lot of dialogue in the film as well. Now, is that interesting? Have you ever heard that before in a hardcore film? There is a lot of dialogue, and there's also a lot of sex. This is a film that is almost claustrophobic, it means. I mean, it doesn't feel claustrophobic, but in terms of only being a couple characters and in the same locations, that's it. And it could almost play out like a theatrical play, because it really could be on stage in that particular way. A couple different homes, or a barn, a couple beds, a couple areas in the forest, next to a body of water, so on and so forth. And what we have in here is we have extremely sexual dialogue using words such as cock and pussy and getting wet and blow, harder, stick. I mean, that definitely seems to be a Joseph Sarno staple. I reviewed a movie on this YouTube page called Lara's Toys, which also has very, very sexual dialogue, very vulgar, explicit sexual dialogue that you would hear in a porno film, when even he's not even doing porno films. He still has that dialogue sometimes. But in this particular film, we do have that dialogue. And we have something that's very, very fiercely done in this film, which is we have sexuality meeting Christianity head on, of sorts. Sexuality, the themes of our darkest fantasies, unbridled sexuality, and what it takes to get there. The breaking of bonds, the freedom of sexuality, and the excuses for having no boundaries in your sexuality, or the excuses for having boundaries in your sexuality, and how these things meet. And there's not necessarily a somewhat of a resolution here, as Christianity still is moving within this world, but it is a very, very complex, interestingly theological and sexual world, where we truly have paganism in some form or fashion, as one character represents kind of paganism versus a Christian community of sorts. And it's not just the people, it's not the people, it's the ideals, and it's the biblical stories versus a historical story, and the power of both, or the weakness of one or the other. There is a bit of seemingly comedy in this film. I mean, is there? It seems as though there could be, as things are erupting and relationships are erupting, and the sex scenes are quite wild, quite explicit, quite just nuts. Yes, you're seeing ejaculation. There's oral. There's vaginal, there's orgies, there's lesbianism, and mostly heterosexual. And yes, the movie is well known for, well, there's even a fisting scene in this film. There's one female in this movie playing a mother. Yes, there's some, whole hand goes in there, and there's also a humongous sausage, a huge sausage. It's actually on the DVDs. Let me see if I can get it here. This sausage here, that's a sausage, also goes inside of her. There's also masturbation in the film, female masturbation. And this is a film of, I mean, it's almost outrageous and shocking, meeting Joseph Sarno's dramatic tension. And also, in this particular case, relationship conflict and religious relationship conflict, and one character representing freedom and blowing the trumpet of sexual freedom. And in many regards, it reminded me in some ways of the modern Rob Zombie film Lords of Salem, when the record was played in that particular film, the women were held captive. And in this particular film, when the horn is being blown, the women are held captive to their sexual innermost darkest fantasies and desires, with no bounds, out of marriage, in marriage, no bounds. And there is some very strikingly shocking dialogue in this film involving pedophilia and incest, and there's a lot of very, very wild things, even some bestiality dialogue as well. This is it could almost have been a softcore sexploitation erotic film, but there is graphic real sex in this film as well. It is a very, very interesting film, especially in regards to it being an hour and an hour and 50 minutes long, 10 minutes shy of 2 hours for a film like this. And the sex scenes are erupting, and there is sexual tension, and there is blue ball tension as things are moving and cohorting, and the acting is great. I mean, this is a dialogue heavy film as well. You're not sure at times if there's comedy here, or shock effect here, or romance here, or ideals here, but in some ways, as I read somewhere online, maybe on IMDb, there were a couple people talking about this film. They mentioned in some ways it was almost a response to some Ingmar Bergman's films, and I could almost see that this would be a Joe Sarno Ingmar Bergman film, hardcore. So there it is, folks, 1978's FABODJANTAN. Yes, right there. You can get it from diabolicdvd.com. I got it. It was not cheap. It was about almost $40. Bought this a little while ago. But it does have a ton of different movies and a documentary on here as well. A couple different movies and a documentary on here as well. Thank you so much for watching the 10 Room Bizarro YouTube page, where I talk about films that I believe need to be talked about more, like this 1978 film right here. Thank you so much for watching, folks. Many, many more to come. And wow, what a interestingly... it was almost as if the world of Knight Riders in some form or fashion went hardcore, and Joseph Sarno relationship, soap opera, dramatic conflict, theological, religious, love triangles and squares and octagons. Here it is, folks. Good night.